Well, hello, seniors, and welcome back to the Central Bucks Senior Task Force. And we meet here once a month, most every month, on the first Monday of the month. And we meet at 1 o'clock in the afternoon at the Central Bucks Senior Center, 700 North Shady Retreat Road, right here in Doylestown Township, right off the bypass. And you can find us on Comcast Cable Channel 22 and on Verizon Channel 31. So welcome. And today we have a guest with us, Betsy Payne. Welcome, Betsy.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. And Betsy, what's the name of your firm?
Looking ahead.
Looking Ahead.
Looking
ahead. All right, great. And today we're going to be talking about advanced care planning.
Right.
And a lot of people shorten that down to ACP.
That's correct.
Okay, is that how they're doing it in the general healthcare market?
Yes, that's the accepted abbreviation, ACP.
Okay, ACP.
Yeah, ACP.
So when we talk about ACP and we talk about looking ahead, and you work with a lot of different people to help them look ahead.
Right.
What does that really mean? What's looking ahead?
Well, looking ahead really means that we need to consider that eventually we're all going to die, correct?
That's a true statement, best of my knowledge.
I don't think anyone would refute that. And as we look ahead, we need to consider that we plan for almost all the other parts of our life. We plan for the birth of our children, we
Right.
plan for education, we plan for retirement. But how many of us really sit down and think about what type of care we would want as we progress toward our death?
Okay.
And
That's
that's
true.
so very important.
All right. I mean, actually, before I came into this meeting today, I got a call that a friend of mine had passed away. And so, it kind of focused my thoughts about that. That, you really don't know when anything is going to happen. That this person happened to be ill for some time, but it was still unusual and unexpected that she would pass away when she did. But tell me a little bit about the difficulty of talking about end-of-life issues. I mean, and it's primarily end-of-life issues, but not always end-of-life issues, I guess.
Not always end of life, but let me start by defining what advanced care planning is.
You can do that.
How's that sound?
Yes, I'd
So,
love that. Thank you.
advanced care planning is a process of thinking about what your goals for future health care would be if you reach a point that you're unable to speak for yourself.
Okay.
So it's taking the concept of living wills and healthcare power of attorneys, which we've all heard about.
Right.
Right, we've all heard
Sure,
about
we've
them.
heard about that.
But
yeah.
so few Americans take the time to create the documents.
Mm-hmm.
But what's more important than creating a document is really have an understanding of what your choices are for future health care and how that fits in what your own goals, values, and beliefs are.
Okay.
So it's taking a decision and putting it in context of what's important to you,
So you talk about not many people plan ahead.
right?
Now, I happen to have a will and, power of attorney and, living will and things like that. So I guess to me it's a natural part of what one should do, right? But talk about that. Are there percentages of the population that we know don't have that?
There are, and it's pretty shocking, actually.
Okay, shock me.
Shock you. Generally, we state that less than 30% of
Okay.
Americans have taken the time to create a living will and healthcare power of attorney. And living wills, what's so shocking about that, I think, is living wills have been around since the late 1960s. So it's not a new concept.
So when somebody goes into the hospital, they often ask for those documents.
Mm-hmm.
Do they require those documents in order to kind of move ahead with somebody's care?
They don't require them,
Okay.
but what a wonderful thing to have, right? So
Right.
it would act as a guide to healthcare providers as far as what type of care you would want if you're not able to speak for yourself.
Okay, so I mean, I think for the viewing audience, I think the thing that we want to reinforce is, if something happens to you, right, you have a stroke or you fall and, you just can't, you go unconscious, right, and you
Right.
can't communicate, but somebody finds you and so forth. By having these documents in advance of all that, is really a good thing, and quite frankly, is almost a necessary thing if you want to be treated the way you want to be treated.
Well, exactly, Kevin. You nailed it. It's absolutely imperative that if you want the type of care you want, if you're in a situation where you can't speak for yourself, and
Right.
no, let me define that a living will only goes into effect when you're either permanently unconscious, okay, and the doctors decide there's little to no hope of recovery.
Okay.
So it's a terminal situation.
Yes.
Both of those pieces need to be present for a living will to be looked at.
Mm.
Okay, but when they're present, it acts as a guide to the healthcare providers and to the family members. But you need to tie that document with the conversation. So what we really encourage our families to do is to think about what their goals of care would be
Right?
and discuss it with their family members. And that's not easy.
Come on.
That's
Who
not
does
easy.
that? Nobody does that.
No.
I don't know of very many people that are willing to sit down over dinner or over a glass of wine necessarily and bring up the topic of death.
I know.
It's just hard.
It is hard.
So,
Because we're frightened. We're frightened to
course.
think about it. And I've had people say to me, well, if I sit down and talk about it, maybe it'll happen sooner. No. No, of course that's not true.
right.
But if we don't talk about it, then you're not in charge, right? You're not able to express to people what you want. So
Right.
when people can take the time to think about it and talk about it in a period when they're not under stress,
Okay.
then a really rich conversation comes out of it. And we say it's a gift to the family members, it's a gift to themselves,
Right.
and it's a gift to healthcare providers.
So everybody who's, watching us today wants to know, how do I begin that conversation? What are some of the things that I can say that would be triggers so that the conversation can occur? Give me an example if you have one.
Okay, so how about you've completed your document?
I'm gonna die.
No, you're
No.
not going to say it that way.
All right, don't say that.
No, you're going to say, let's say you're saying to your daughter, Sarah, Sarah, I took the time to create a document called a living will. And it's really important to me to discuss with you what my wishes are for if I reach a point where I can no longer speak for myself.
Mom, I don't want to hear that.
I know, hon.
No, I'm
I know
sorry.
it's
I don't
hard.
want to talk about it.
I know.
I'm not talking about it. Now,
And-
isn't that the reaction most people give?
Sometimes.
Yes, right?
So then you have to reapproach it, and perhaps in a different way.
Okay.
At a different time. Sometimes if you can put it in context of an event, like you just said, a friend of yours just passed away.
Right.
Sometimes death of another loved one
Oh, I agree.
or a friend can
Right.
trigger a conversation.
I think that's a really appropriate thing to think about, right? Because we do have friends, family, coworkers, etc., neighbors that
Right.
maybe we don't know well, but all of a sudden we hear of somebody's passing, and it's an easy way to go into that conversation. Both for, it's not just son and daughter and parent, it can be two spouses, right? Husband and wife, or husband and husband, wife and wife.
Absolutely.
However it works, right? So the reality is that maybe that's the thing to do, is to kind of put the obituaries out on the kitchen table and go, did you see she passed away? I want to, maybe we should talk about this. This is something that's concerning me.
That is an absolutely wonderful approach. After my mother passed away, I sat down with my father, and my approach to him was, Dad, you were here to take care of Mom, and you did it in a beautiful, beautiful way. I want to be able to take care of you the way you want.
Right.
We need to talk about this. We need to talk about this. And it was hard. Even with my own dad, it was hard.
Yes.
But it's such a wonderful, intimate conversation when it occurs.
Right. Well, let's talk about who gets involved, because ultimately there may be money involved, like I've got to go to an attorney maybe. No?
An attorney does not have to be involved with,
But should they be?
not necessarily.
Okay. So when should they, and when do they not
An
have to be?
An attorney does not have to be involved when completing a living will or a
Okay.
healthcare power of attorney.
But I don't know how to write one of those.
You don't need to write one. There's many that are available.
How?
On the state,
Where?
On the state website, you can download a document.
Okay. I'm not an online person.
Looking Ahead has a wonderful
So
document.
organizations like Looking Ahead.
Organizations. The hospital has a form.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So I could go into the hospital, and what would I do? Go to the admissions people, or what?
You could just probably even ask at information desk, do they have a copy of a living will?
Okay, that's a
or
great idea. Okay. So I could go in and I could, maybe the even better thing is to get that, read it, kind of understand it, and then get some professional help.
I would agree. There's also literature we make available, and I think what we have found in our work with Looking Ahead is to date we've done over 80 conversations with individuals and many presentations. And we find that people will come to the presentation and hear how important this is, and they all agree. They all think, oh my goodness, I need to do this, but then
Right.
getting them to sit down can be tough.
Right.
When they sit down with someone to help guide them, it happens.
Okay. So obviously there are organizations like yours, that's good, but attorneys are also important, I would
And
suspect.
attorneys can do it. I'm not
Right,
saying they can't.
Right, and
Absolutely.
I'm just thinking about, this is a county filled with attorneys, for God's sakes. So,
Yes.
so let's tap them, right?
Right.
So let's look at the documents, let's one by one look at them. First thing would be a will.
A living will. Let's say a living will. A living will is not an estate will.
Okay,
So
so
that's where
two
an
separate things.
Two separate things. That's
It's
where
important
the
to know that.
Well, and that's where the attorneys absolutely have to be doing the documents.
Right.
They do the document for the living will or the estate will,
Yes,
and then the power of attorney,
yes,
which without the word healthcare implies financial and everything else.
okay,
A healthcare power of attorney and a living will in the state of Pennsylvania does not need to be crafted by a lawyer.
okay,
It just simply needs to be witnessed by two adults over 18,
okay.
and it does help sometimes to have it notarized.
So, I mean, I guess I would feel that's okay to do it on your own, but probably doing it on your own is not the best. I'm just going to say, but that I'll leave it there for now. So we've got a will, we've got a living will, we've got a power of attorney, and a healthcare power of attorney. Almost, there could be 4 documents here.
There could be.
Okay. So a will deals with your estate, as you said, and a living will deals with how you would like to be cared for in your end days if you can't speak for yourself and communicate
Exactly.
for yourself.
Exactly.
Power of attorney is typically financially oriented, like, can sign deeds and buy things and sell things on your behalf if you can't do them or don't want to do them, I guess.
Right.
And then the healthcare power of attorney is helpful to the healthcare providers to say, this is a person whose opinion is my
Counts.
opinion.
Right, and let me expand on that a little bit because I think that's really important. The healthcare power of attorney document, in some ways, is even more important than the living will, in the sense that the living will acts as a guide with your healthcare decisions.
Okay.
The healthcare power of attorney document designates on the form we use. We designate 3 individuals, a primary and 2 alternates, and those are going to be individuals that you choose. People that you trust, people that you feel can honor your wishes even though they may not want to honor them, and that can make decisions under stress.
Right.
And any of these documents, the living will and the healthcare power of attorney, can be changed. It's not cast in
It's
stone.
not permanent.
They need to be updated frequently,
Right.
or particularly when there's a change in health status.
So what would frequently mean? Once a year?
Well, we always say with a healthcare change that's significant.
Okay.
Um,
Like
if-
if you fall and break a hip, something like that.
At a minimum, every couple of years, but gosh, I think we should look at it every time we do our taxes.
Hey, what a great
You know,
way to say that.
right.
Yeah, I think that's
And the other
true.
thing that's really important, I think, to state about advance directives or a living will and a healthcare power of attorney is they're not going to do anybody any good if they're kept in a file drawer. They need to be shared. They need to be shared with the family members, with the healthcare power of attorneys, with their primary care physician,
Right.
and with the hospitals.
So would I actually, once I had all the documents, physically go to the hospital and say, nothing's wrong with me,
But scan it into my
but
record, please.
take it? Okay, now I haven't done that.
Yeah.
What's interesting too is, and my wife just completed her healthcare documents, and her daughter didn't want to make those decisions about her end of life, right? So, clearly it was, do we give Kevin full responsibility for that with backup, or do we split it with her daughter? You know, and she decided, no, I don't want to be split with that. I'd rather, you know, let Kevin do it and, you know, have Kevin consult me, right? So that makes sense.
So that was a good way to do it.
Right.
That was a good way to do it.
You know, we put a letter and all that kind of thing to that effect. So, okay, so, but having that conversation, I think, is still the big issue.
It is.
It's really the big issue, right? Because very few people pre-plan things like their funerals. Very few people take a lot of time with their retirement planning even.
Right.
They kind of check the box when they're at work and go from there. And they'll figure it out when they get there.
Right.
And a lot of people do want to say, hey, I feel good. Why do I need to do this? I don't want to focus on it. So I guess what I'm saying is find ways to trigger that conversation, as we said. But go ahead and maybe do it anyway, even if you can't get others to talk with you about it.
Absolutely.
But get it done. And, you know, maybe then you just put the documents, you know, on the coffee table and say, oh, what are these doing here? Yes.
Let's go over this, honey.
Yes.
Yeah, you absolutely have to get it done. And there's always a way to work it into a conversation with your family members. But also, they need to speak with their primary care physicians about it as well.
Yes.
They could, if they do a document at home or with the help of someone else on their next visit, they could go into the doctor's office and say, you know, I completed this. I'd like you to have a copy of it.
Well, Betsy, let's talk about one thing that I think could help our viewers, you know, really understand what the issues are, and that's understanding if you don't have the document or documents, what happens. Because I think that, you know, we as human beings, we either kind of go toward pleasure or run from pain, right? And pleasure is always good. Great food, wine, enjoyments, you know, socializing with people. That's all great stuff, right? Pain would be, you know, scary things, right? You know, so, you know, what I'm trying to say is, can you give us a scenario that might occur or you've seen occur for people that don't have the documents and kind of how it wasn't so good?
I absolutely can. And I think if we remember in our society that our medical technology allows us to keep people alive longer than ever before.
And alive doesn't mean...
Alive doesn't mean that there is a quality of life to that person.
Right.
And that's what you start beginning to think about. What is my quality of life? So in our healthcare system, because we can do so much,
Right.
we almost go into the default is to treat. We'll always treat, and we hope we're treating in the right way. But if we reach a point where the individual has little chance of recovery and we're continuing to treat, there almost needs to be, you know, someone saying, is this right?
Well, isn't it tough, though, for a lot of healthcare professionals not to treat?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you know, I've been through some things.
I know you have,
And,
Kevin.
you know, and I lived this where, you know, we didn't want additional treatment. We had it in our documents for no additional treatment. And the healthcare providers said, we are not going to do that. We are not going to not do what you want. You know, I mean, put it succinctly, they were just not going to go along with our wishes. And that was very, very frustrating, right? So, you know, how can you make documents that, you know, are ironclad?
There's no ironclad document, Kevin, and this isn't a perfect world, but it's a better world. It's a better world when individuals have taken the time to think about what their goals of care are well ahead of time, right? Well ahead of time, and then they're written down and they're communicated. Versus those that are dying, they reach the hospital, and there's no guide, and there's nobody that's been designated as a healthcare power of attorney.
Why do you think that healthcare providers wouldn't honor your wishes?
Let me answer that by saying I think in most cases, if they know what the wishes are, they will honor them.
But We know that
But
they
we
don't
know
always.
sometimes they don't.
Right.
And then you have to work really hard to get a dialogue going
Right.
with other healthcare professionals. In this case, I would answer by saying all hospitals have an ethics committee where if there's a disagreement going on, you can seek other support. Most hospitals have a palliative care team.
Right.
People that specialize in end-of-life
Right,
issues that can
right.
help guide.
Okay. So I think, from my thinking, they often want you to disclose what your wishes are. I think that nursing homes and hospitals and, other types of facilities should disclose what they are willing to do or not do. And I think that way a consumer can make an informed decision about, paying somebody for their services. Let's, go
I
ahead.
want to add something, a thought that just has occurred to me. I think as we progress forward through the next 10 years or so, 20 years, I think we're going to be seeing a shift in this attitude that you're describing. And the reason I say that, the term advanced care planning is becoming much more widespread.
Okay.
It's becoming more readily understood by the healthcare establishment. In fact, Medicare has authorized billing codes to start in 2016 for physicians to have end-of-life conversations with their Medicare patients.
Okay, now let's interpret that.
huge.
Let's interpret that. Billing codes, what does that mean?
It means that physician offices will be able to get reimbursement from Medicare
Okay.
to have a conversation with their patients about what their wishes are
So,
for end-of-life.
so
that puts it in a whole different
it
frame of
helps.
importance,
It
doesn't
helps,
it?
right? Because money helps. So a doctor then, when he or she meets with their patient, could have a conversation about end-of-life issues, and that conversation would be paid for by Medicare? Wow.
And I think what that does, it's really exciting to us because it raises the level of this important conversation.
Yes.
And it's not a conversation that's done in 10 minutes.
Right.
It can take, some of our conversations average an hour and a half, sometimes we need 2. But it raises the level of importance
Right.
and the impact these conversations can have on the quality of life and care at the end of life.
Well, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
It's too bad that that somebody has to get paid in order to have that conversation, or at least to make it more accessible. But it is what it is.
Well, it's
That's
now
good.
recognized by
Yeah.
the medical establishment to be important.
Yeah.
And that's
I think that's the
That's
key
the
factor.
takeaway there.
That's the takeaway.
You know.
That's good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether you're okay talking about the right to die. And, a lot of, there's the assisted suicide that's out there in certain states, of course not here in Pennsylvania where we are.
Right.
But do you have any thoughts about that, where that's going? Or does that ever come up in your conversations?
I don't think it really comes up in our conversations because,
Okay.
and if it did, I mean, everyone's entitled to their own opinions about that.
Right.
My experience in nursing, healthcare, and hospice has me a believer that when we know someone's wishes toward the end of life and they're recognized and supported, hospice care will allow the death to occur in a beautiful, natural way.
Yes.
So, some would believe that negates that need to the right to die. But the right to die, the right to know what health care you want in the future, there's a little bit of similarity there. You want to
Okay.
you want to communicate what is important to you
Right.
if you can't speak for yourself.
So let's just circle back on kind of that worst case scenario. Because again, I think it comes down to people are driven by pain and pleasure, and they definitely want to avoid the pain. And so that'll make them kind of make decisions sometimes because they want to avoid something. So, so feeding tubes, right? Let's talk about feeding tubes. Does that come up? Is that part of the discussion?
Yes, it is actually.
Okay.
Feeding tubes and hydration is part of most living will documents, but it's put in the context of, and let's keep reminding ourselves that a living will only goes into effect if you are not able to speak for yourself and the
Right.
doctors state there's little hope for recovery.
Right.
And in that case, if there's discussions about feeding tube or hydration, it centers around the fact that when an individual is dying, is starting the dying process, a feeding tube or hydration, adding additional nutrients into the body and or fluids can make it harder, actually, for the
Right.
body to do its work.
I think that's what, but isn't there a natural, at least there used to be, kind of a natural response feeding tube?
Yeah.
And I think that still persists somewhat, but it's changing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, my own personal experience has been, 20 years ago when my grandmother was in a nursing home, it was almost forced upon us as a family against our wishes. Today, it's more of a, would you prefer that? And they're almost saying, do you really want that? Kind of like, you don't really want that, do you? So by having the living will done, you can say, no, I absolutely positively don't want that.
If I
as an
reach that
example.
point. Exactly
Or I do.
right. Exactly
Or I want
right.
all measures taken, or I want very few measures, or I want just comfort,
Right.
and I don't want to be really sustained indefinitely.
That's exactly right. You described that beautifully.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I typically do. But so let's just focus then on what you do at looking ahead, okay? And this is not an ad, of course, but there are multiple organizations like yourself in the country,
Right.
and some are for-profit, some are not-for-profit. And yours is,
We are nonprofit.
so nonprofit, that's
Right.
great. But what's the process? I mean, how does that actually somebody even start with you?
They would give us a call, and
Right.
what we do is we have developed some wonderful literature. We would send them an advanced care planning guide.
Right,
And our information and our literature comes from a proven program out in La Crosse, Wisconsin called Respecting Choices.
okay,
That was started in a healthcare system and has really been a game changer out there. So you remember I said less than 30% of Americans have a living will.
right,
Out in La Crosse, Wisconsin, their research shows that 96% of the residents that live there have.
that's almost incredible.
Yeah, and what's better than that is when they've done a retrospective chart review
Okay.
on individuals that died over a period of time. And I think the last time they did this was in 2007 and 2008. 99% of the records they looked at had the care that the individual had indicated on their documents.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't get better than that,
No,
does it?
no.
So we are trained in this methodology. Our literature reflects their literature.
Okay.
And so it's a process. It's a process of sitting down with us and understanding what their choices are for future health care,
Okay,
taking the time to understand and reflect on it. What do they really want? We're not going to come to you and have you try and fill something out in 20 minutes. We want you to really think about it in the context of your own being.
so how do you do that? When you're sitting with somebody, how do you elicit those types of responses?
Well, we asked some really interesting questions.
You're kidding me.
Would you like me to ask you an interesting question?
Well, yes, go ahead, try me.
So if you called me up and said, Bets, I'd like to have a conversation with you.
Bets, I'd like to have a conversation with
Okay,
you.
so I would start it with, Kevin, thank you for coming and talking with me today.
Right.
Let's talk for a minute. What kind of fears do you have about talking about this?
I feel pretty okay talking about it.
Okay.
Actually, I mean that's why I called you, because I wanna do that. But I know that others don't feel the same way I do, so I have sometimes a tough time bringing this conversation up with others.
Okay.
But so I'm trying to learn. So that would be a good question.
That's one of our questions. Another question is, tell me if you've had any experiences with somebody personal in your life or somebody that you knew that had a sudden illness or death, and how did that leave you feeling?
And so I would say it didn't feel good, right? I mean, there's a great sense of loss, mourning, right?
And sometimes those experiences create a framework of fear, right, for going forward, or it clearly shows the person, I saw this happening and I don't want that to happen.
Right.
So what do I need to do next?
Okay.
Then we go through the conversation with, do they understand what a healthcare power of attorney is? That's
Okay.
so important.
Yes.
We help them think about who they might choose.
Show them examples, I guess.
We give them examples. We have literature.
Okay.
Then the next question we ask them is, consider this scenario. Consider a moment where you had a tragic accident, let's say a car accident, that left you in a state where you were unable to know yourself or those around you. And the doctors were saying to your loved ones, there's little chance of recovery. Kevin, to really be sustained, he might need this additional care. What would Kevin's wishes be? What would you want in that instance?
Okay.
And then people kind of pause and think about it. Right?
Yeah. I've actually seen, and I don't know where this is, but like a card game. Have you seen the card game version of this?
Yes.
Which is kind of interesting too, and you can kind of do it on your own or they actually have parties around some of this, don't they?
They do. They do.
All right, so we're going to have a party.
Are we going to have a card game?
Wine, cheese.
And you're all invited.
Absolutely, everybody's invited.
Everyone just listening. Ooh, that could be a big
the
party.
whole audience. Well, why not? We'll meet in the middle of Doylestown, and we'll have a good time.
It's a different document than a living will. It basically takes the living will, which is not a doctor's order, and puts it into the context of a doctor's order, which then follows the individual through transitions of care, right? So it's a really important document, and just starting to come into play here in Pennsylvania. It's been at really a lot of the Midwest and the coast. Maybe, Veronica, do you want to say something about Pulse?
Yes, I'm a retired internist and spent some time with hospice, so I've had some experience with a lot of these end-of-life issues. What I see is that the need for this kind of thing, for ACP, comes from two sources. One is the high technology that medicine has developed. It's very complex today. And the fragmentation of care, this is the more important thing. Way back, the family doctor did these conversations. The family doctor knew the patient and was usually there in the hospital when that patient got ill. Knew the family, so the decisions were kind of much easier because they all knew each other and more or less understood what the patient might want. That doesn't happen now. And when you hear stories over and over again how patients were put through extensive treatment when they had a living will sitting at home saying they didn't want it, it's because the doctor that sees that patient in the hospital has never seen them before. They don't know the family. They don't know what this patient wants. And so the tendency is to keep treating. Getting to the Pulse simply takes what's in the living will, the patient's orders, and condenses it into 3 parts, whether they want full aggressive treatment or a modification of some treatment but not the full, works, or they don't want any treatment at all. And it has to be signed by a physician and the patient or their agent, so it becomes a physician order. And it's effective in a nursing home, in the hospital. If they go out in a restaurant and collapse on the floor, the EMTs they can wear a bracelet, the EMTs will recognize, and it is becoming more and more important. But it's only designed for people who are really at pretty much an end stage, where doctors wouldn't be surprised if they died within a year or a year and a half. It's not for everyone. And the physician's role in all of this, I think, is very important. And we are trying to educate and trying to get to the point where this advanced care planning process can be integrated into every office in the routine annual physical, so that it becomes less threatening and less scary for people, that it's just routine, it's something to think about. It's totally voluntary on the part of patients. Nobody's forcing anybody to sign these. Hospital will treat anybody, doctors will treat anybody whether they have a living will or not. But if it gets integrated into the routine, it then becomes, part of our broad general medical care. Sometimes we've had patients come to us who are up and about, walking, active, working, and say, I don't care what happens to me, I don't want anything done. That's tough. I don't think any doctor is going to honor that. If you have metastatic cancer or end-stage heart disease or, Lou Gehrig's disease, and you're definitely have a terminal illness that's going to kill you sooner or later, that's a different story. And also, I wanted to mention that all the documents, living wills and healthcare powers of attorney, most physicians have them in their office, and that's often where the whole process generates. Physicians who are, generally concerned about their patient's welfare, if they see a patient entering into a chronic illness with a downward slope, they will very often ask. And it's become pretty common now in primary care offices as part of the routine, just in gathering information, is to say, do you have an advance directive, yes or no, as they do in the hospital. But most doctors aren't really trained or prepared to have this discussion. And in my own experience as a physician, my asking the questions that Betsy just asked and having this conversation about what you want takes on a little different meaning, because there's a relationship between the doctor and the patient. Patients might be afraid that if they say, no, I don't want anything, then the doctor is going to not do anything at all. And so it's a little tricky sometimes.
Okay, so I think that I'd like to close, with anything that you'd like to add. Is there any particular thing that you feel hasn't been covered and really is important to the senior community here in the area?
Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything, but I think what's so important is these conversations really are an opportunity for them to express to their loved ones and their healthcare providers what's important to them.
Yes.
And how we can take care of them at the end of life. So to quote someone quite dear to us, it's not so much how can we take care of you, but it's how can we love you? How can we take care of you?
Yes.
And make sure that it's what you want.
Yes.
So I would encourage all our seniors to take advantage of this opportunity.
Okay, it's really about love.
It's about love.
It's about loving yourself, it's about loving others, and when you love others, you show that by doing these things for them, right? And for yourself.
And for yourself.
That's
right.
great. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, come back again, okay?
I will. Thank
Great.
you.
All right, be well. So next time, join us right here, the appointed hour. If you want to come and join us at 1 o'clock on most first Mondays of the month, except for the summer, right here at the Central Bucks Senior Center at 700 North Shady Retreat Road. Thanks. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.